All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. It's great to see everyone. I've been in several seminars in this room, and it's my first time presenting here, so that feels nice. When Madison asked me my title of my talk a few months ago, I gave this one. I was hired as an assistant professor of land atmosphere interactions, and I work in the Western US, and so it seemed like a good one, and one that I had at the ready. As I got preparing for this seminar, I thought, all right, maybe a little more accurate would be something like eco-hydrology, right? So land atmosphere for me is eco-hydrology, right? But I do a little bit more than land atmosphere too. So kind of more umbrella term. And then water limited systems, like I work in the Western US, but kind of maybe a better way to encompass more of what I wanted to talk about today. And then as I got going more, I realized that one of the main goals I wanted to do was talk about these themes, but also try to keep things fresh for those that may have seen my job talk recently or my department seminar recently. So the way that I went about this was the first kind of half of the talk. I'm going to talk about themes, kind of stuff that I'm involved in, stuff that I'm interested in. And then maybe the second half, hopefully a little less than half, I'll just kind of walk through one research story that I don't think anybody in here has heard about because I don't think I've presented before. So just to give you an example of the kind of eco-hydrology and land atmosphere stuff that I do. So on Madison's encouragement, I'm going to start with like a 5-minute introduction to kind of figure out who I am and where I come from. So PhD at University of Colorado Boulder. And I put INSTAR's logo up there too. I don't know how many people are familiar with INSTAR. It's the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research. And I'm going to try to refer to this a couple times today that, that to me was every bit as important as CU. Like I sat at INSTAR, all my friends were at INSTAR. INSTAR pulled from geology, atmospheric science, environmental biology, geography. I'm forgetting several, right? It was a environmental institute. You didn't have to work Alpine or Arctic. And so I've seen how good institutes can be, right? I came up through my training with an institute, and it makes me really excited about the institute on ecosystems. And so I'm excited to be a part of that now and to be here today. So for my PhD and grad work, I worked with the Niwot Ridge LTER. I have laser here, I might as well use it. This is an eddy covariance or eddy flux tower. I'm going to talk about that today. I got trained on how to use those. I set one up at the very beginning of my master's and used it for almost my entire, all my projects during grad school. And then this is a soil respiration chamber, which is a different kind of smaller scale way to quantify land atmosphere exchange. And I used a lot of that for my PhD as well. I stayed on to do a postdoc for a couple more years. My child was finishing school and I wanted to get her into a good break period before moving. So that gave me an opportunity to learn about remote sensing. So I worked with a satellite remote sensing group. This is like a cutout of the southern Rocky Mountain ecoregion, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico, masked to forested areas in a study that I did about forest disturbance. And then finally, when we were all set, everybody was in a good spot. All my academic mentors said, if you want to pursue the academia thing, you have to leave Boulder. So after 12 years, we hit the road to Tucson. I started as a postdoc at the U of A, and then I transitioned over to the ARS where I worked for 3 years. In Tucson, I moved from mountain and forest ecosystems into the desert, which you can also think of kind of as analogous to the rangeland systems that we have here. I started poking needles in plants for the first time, getting kind of an eco-hydrology of plants themselves. And I kind of added this spectral tool to my toolbox, working with especially a colleague, Bill Smith, who was at University of Arizona at the time. And so tower-based and satellite-based hyperspectral imaging, which is a part of what I bring with me now. So then I was applying to jobs every year. I finally, assistant professor of eco-hydrology at Chico State was a great fit. So I was thrilled to land there. I was there for 3 years before here. And really the big thing that I brought, or that I bring from Chico State, is agriculture, right? Chico, California, Central Valley. The school has a university farm, which is super cool, right? To do research, demonstration stuff. And so here's a picture of some of us at the farm in the almond orchard. This is a cool little AGU did a 6-minute movie about some project we got funded looking at regenerative agriculture and the potential of regenerative agriculture to sequester carbon and mitigate climate change. So one of the things that kind of defines me as a researcher is at this point, I'm pretty system agnostic, right? Like I work in forests, mountains, deserts, rangelands, managed systems, ag, right? And then here in Montana, kind of in some ways, a little bit back full circle to the mountains and the forested systems that really got me, if I'm honest, that got me into environmental science in the first place. So this is a site that I'll be talking about. This is the view from the top of the Flux Tower at Tenderfoot Creek. I'll talk a little bit more today. And then the only other spot I've been to, which is Red Bluff, in the about 13 months that I've lived in Montana so far. So anyway, this is kind of me in a nutshell. This is another way I thought might be fun to just introduce you to me, right? So like I just pulled out some kind of piecemeal snapshots of things that I bring with me, but this is a fun tool I encourage people to play around with that somebody invented, and you put in your Google Scholar ID and tweak little levers about what shape and what color you like, and it will pull out the words from your Google Scholar of whatever you've published since whenever you tell it the date range. So this is me, and this is forever. I told it words had to appear a certain amount of times before they come up in here. So this is, a lot of stuff that I've worked on. I really liked this and wanted to show it for another reason, because of the dark word in kind of dark blue towards the top, and that's ecosystem. And so another just kind of trying to call back to the IOE, right? Like I am an ecosystem scientist. Like that is first and foremost among the top things that I self-define myself as, and the world, as seen through Google Scholar, sees me as well, right? So just like institutes, IOE is just something that I'm really excited to be a part of. Another way that you can say a lot of the words on this word cloud, right? Start kind of squinting and looking at that, or interpret them, is through this lens of something called Earth's critical zone. So Earth's critical zone coined a couple decades ago, 2 rounds of critical zone observatories funded by NSF, and now a full-on part of the NSF WALTS program. So critical zone science has kind of made it and lives on indefinitely. You can submit proposals to NSF critical zone at any time defined as the upper layer of Earth's surface from bedrock to the tree canopy. So that's a vertical, right, from the bottom of the weathered soil profile to the top of the tree canopy, where water, atmosphere, ecosystems, soil, and rock interact. So again, a lot of those words, right, were on my last slide. So critical zone was a natural fit for me. Critical because it's the zone where water flows, where soil is formed, and where life on Earth is found. And so I wanted to put in a very shameless plug for going to teach my first grad class ever. Chico State didn't have didn't really have grad classes per se. Called Earth's Critical Zone next semester. I don't think it's live and able to be registered for yet, but it is definitely going to be offered. So if you're a grad student, if you know a grad student that's interested in any of these themes, please spread the word, tell them to just kind of bookmark it in their head, and when it gets available to be registered for, that will be offered this spring. It will be kind of based in the primary literature, and really excited to be teaching that. I have a grad student at Chico State, Abby. This is her with her portable soil respiration chamber, who's working on a funded critical zone project. There's something called the Dynamic Water Critical Zone. Her field site is in the Coal Creek catchment near Crested Butte, Colorado. So she's terribly unlucky on that front. This is some example of her data. I show this because I'm interested in soils. I'm interested in soil respiration, right? I advise students on that. I collaborate on that. But I'm not going to talk about that today. So really, I don't think I'd be doing a disservice if I'm trying to introduce myself and I didn't talk about the eddy covariance method. So something that's really the backbone of my research. This is in this NSF diagram picture of the critical zone observatory, right? I told you I work with satellites. I definitely work with stream flow and soil data and needles in trees. But this depiction of a tower is really near and dear to what I do. And so I'm going to kind of describe from here on out how I use that to get at questions of ecohydrology. So here's my eddy covariance, how it works slide. So it's a tower that I've run for 18 years now, incredibly. All you need for the eddy covariance method is these two sensors, close up shown right here. There's kind of a ball on a stick, and there's kind of one that looks like two claws facing each other, right? And so these are high frequency, meaning measured at 10 or 20 times per second. Sensors that the claw is measuring wind speed, right? It's a fancy wind sensor. It uses the speed of sound. It measures the along wind, the crosswind, and the vertical component of the wind speed. So it's hence the three prongs, one for each, facing each other. And the ball on a stick is an infrared gas analyzer. And so it's sitting there measuring super, high frequency concentrations of CO2 and water vapor. And so by measuring both of those simultaneously at the same time, and taking advantage of the fact that the wind, as it passes over Earth's surface due to friction at Earth's surface, slows down the wind and creates turbulent eddies. I really like this way that's shown in this picture. At all scales, right? Turbulent eddy behind this tree, a turbulent eddy behind the tower, a turbulent eddy behind the mountain. By taking advantage of the fact that all the CO2 and water vapor that's exchanged between Earth's surface and the atmosphere is contained within these eddies, we're able to use these measurements to make ecosystem scale measurements of carbon dioxide and water vapor flux between the surface and the atmosphere. And I'll explain a little bit more about how that works. So from the carbon side of things, just to make sure we're on the same page, at the ecosystem scale anyway, carbon coming into an ecosystem through photosynthesis at the ecosystem scale, we tend to call gross primary productivity, or GPP. So this is a big flux of carbon from the atmosphere right into plants on Earth's surface. And going the opposite way, we have respiration. So I've shown it here as R eco for ecosystem respiration, recognizing that this arrow is made up of autotrophic respiration from plants above and below ground, as well as heterotrophic respiration by microbes as they chew up organic matter and decompose that and breathe it out as CO2 to the atmosphere. So all of these come together to make the flux of carbon out of the ecosystem. So GPP coming in, respiration going out, and what eddy covariance measures is the net of those two big fluxes, which tends to be a much smaller number, right? Because you're balancing the two. And I've shown it as a two-directional arrow because it's totally valid and common for sometimes there's a net flux of CO2 into an ecosystem when photosynthesis outweighs respiration, like daytime, summertime, when things are growing really well. And so in eddy covariance world, that's usually represented as a downward or a negative flux. Or the opposite, right? Every night, for example, photosynthesis cuts off, you've got respiration still, and so NEE, or net ecosystem exchange of CO2, is going to be positive during that time. Okay? So eddy flux, carbon cycle, we're dealing with this net ecosystem exchange term, and I've shown, I'm glad when I see that I've reminded myself with this graphic that the cool thing about it, and one of the things that fits so well with me being an ecosystem scientist, is that the NEE measurement that you get from your sensors located at a point is representative of is the integrated measurement that's representative of some area upwind that depends on how tall your tower is, right? How high above ground you're measuring, but tends to be on the order of a half a kilometer to a kilometer upwind. Right, so one number, NEE, that's integrating all the processes that go on over some space, and for that reason, it typically in the literature it gets called an ecosystem scale measurement. So that allows us to work at that ecosystem scale. On the water side of things, just want to make sure we're on the same page here. You can ignore this. One of these days I'll figure out how to take it out. But this is a graphic I made that we're measuring evaporation or evapotranspiration or latent heat flux, whatever you want to call it, right? Evaporation is the water side of things. Latent heat flux is the energy side of things. And whenever I talk about evaporation or ET today, or really ever, I'm pretty much considering the sum or all of these terms together. So eddy flux gives us this one number. It's an ecosystem scale water measurement, and it includes whatever bare soil evaporation is going on, whatever sublimation is going on, and whatever transpiration or ET through plants. So we get that one number as well. And you can imagine this can be really important for water resources type studies. Oh yeah, and this is also a good, thanks, prior self, graphic to remind me to say that, so here we are, right, maybe at the tower scale. And so one of the things I really like defines a lot of my research program is, I bring eddy flux to the table, say, or maybe soil respiration or some land atmosphere flux. But I'm almost always combining it with some other scale flux as well, like UAV or satellite remote sensing or a model to scale up, or kind of thinking down in scale. I've mentioned needles and trees, something like sap flux, right? Or respiration to compare independent methods or different scales to get at the same question, and really dig in especially to those places where the different types of measurements or the measurements in the models don't agree as the kind of knowledge gaps and the ways to push our science forward. All right. So raise your hand if you've heard of Ameriflux. Oh, more than I would have guessed. Awesome, we're doing it. We're getting the word out. So Ameriflux is the network of eddy covariance researchers in the Americas. So that's North, Central, and South America. We're up to in the 700s of sites, which is kind of amazing from what started as a grassroots network of PIs just pooling their data a couple of decades ago. This is the annual meeting that we had last week in Tucson. So this is Ameriflux, folks, as we know it. I was really encouraged. I'm getting more involved in Ameriflux all the time, but Ameriflux is doing okay in the current climate of affairs. I'm here to say that it's very unlikely that Ameriflux will rapidly, at least, fall off the face of the earth right now. So I don't know, it's a big part of what I do, and I'm glad to be able to report that. Probably the biggest thing to report back from what's going on at Ameriflux right now is something called OneFlux. So for anybody who's a user of Ameriflux in this room, or who might be interested, or who might, after they hear my talk, be interested in Ameriflux data, I measure something like NEE, right, with my eddy covariance system, and it looks like this. Data gaps are very common in eddy covariance data, right? We have sensor problems. We have not very good turbulence. We filter them out. We have rodents. We have lightning. There's all kinds of things that go on. OneFlux is a new initiative by which eddy flux data on Ameriflux are reported not just in this format, but with a gap-filled option here, with an uncertainty around that gap-filled data, and then including, this was not part of what you could just download off of Ameriflux beforehand, partitioned ecosystem respiration and GPP fluxes also with their own uncertainties. So if you go on to, at this point, the majority of Ameriflux sites are reporting OneFlux data, have been through this OneFlux processing. And so you can just go on and download. This is all CC by 4 open source data. You just have to cite the DOI. You don't have to involve the PI or anything like that. From 700 and whatever sites across the Americas, we've got GPP and respiration data, ET data, net ecosystem exchange data, gap-filled, partitioned, and with uncertainty. And so this is a huge effort in collaboration with ICOS, which is the European equivalent to Ameriflux, and TERN, which is the Australian equivalent of Ameriflux. The three of us have come together. We're all using the same processing. And if anybody, I don't know, modelers especially, we used to put out like discrete products. The last one was called FluxNet 2015. It had all the sites processed in the same way that had data at that time that were sort of contributing. And modelers loved FluxNet 2015, right? Because they just grab it, and for whatever sites were contributing, they ran their, right? The data were all the same, and it played nicely with their model. Well, there hasn't been a data release in 10 years, and I'm here to say that there will never be another one again, right? This has replaced the discrete offerings. Everything is processed the same through OneFlux, and you can go on your own or through an API and grab whatever sites you're interested in. They'll all be the same. They all have this additional functionality, and use it for whatever you like. So we're really proud of that. These in sort of chronological order are the flux tower sites that I've been most probably involved with. So here's this site from that I set up during my PhD, which turns out was way back in 2007, which makes it the longest continuously running highest elevation flux tower site in the world somehow. It's crazy how time flies. So this is still ongoing with the Niwot Ridge LTER. This is a site I worked a lot at when I was in Arizona. It's a mixed conifer site in the Sky Island Mountains outside of Tucson. Still involved with a little bit. Set this site up when I was a professor at Chico State in the oak savanna, really common ecosystem type that kind of rings California's Central Valley at low elevations. This site burned in the park fire in 2024. So that's probably going to be the cool story to come out of that site. And to be quite honest, I'm trying to pass that to the person that's been hired in my old job, right? You can't run unlimited amounts of flux tower sites. And then this is the one I'm most excited about right now, right? Tenderfoot Creek Experimental Forest came online in September, and a collaboration with the Forest Service Rocky Mountain Research Station and some other folks that have worked at this site over the years. So just kind of what Ameriflux sites look like, what you might see. These are just screenshots of if you go onto ameriflux.lbl.gov, like what you end up seeing and where you end up getting the data. So I know a lot of people in this room have been to Tenderfoot Creek, know a lot about Tenderfoot Creek. It's a site that was established by MSU researchers back in about 2005 and ran till about 2012, but hadn't collected data since that time until September. So this is up in the Little Belt Mountains, about 2.5, 3 hours northeast of here in central Montana. There's no cell phone at that site still. So communications a little tough. But we have something called GOES satellite through our federal colleagues. And so it's pretty cool. I was at my desk yesterday afternoon is when I grabbed these data. We can't get the actual data from the comforts of our office. But what we get is every hour we get 5 seconds on the GOES satellite at 300 baud, which is not very fast. And so we can squeeze out about 140 characters. And so these aren't the data, right? Like the nice 30-minute average data of the 10 hertz fluxes. These are whatever was on the data logger, like the instantaneous value when the GOES satellite does its magic and beams up the data. But still, it's kind of amazingly different from just not knowing anything about the data versus, okay, I can see things are working, at least to some degree. So I mean, these are the variables that come in off GOES. We have that like character string packed lean and mean with no decimals, no punctuation, no nothing, and then we can unpack it right in our MATLAB. And so this is just like checking and unchecking a few of the variables that would kind of fit nicely on one axis, to be quite honest. But like you can see cool stuff like what do we have here? The green and the purple, these are the water vapor concentrations from the erga, right? And we have 2 ergas, one kind of near the top of the tower, that's that CO2 and water vapor sensor, and one down here somewhere on this crossbar down below the canopy. And so just the fact that these are collecting data and they're in a reasonable zone, like, okay, I'm feeling okay about that. That's really good. Same with these zeros. These are all the diagnostics. They're plotted on top of each other. That's the diagnostics flags from the erga and the fancy anemometer. And when they're zeros, that's good. That means it's not at the moment, at that 5-second interval, throwing any flags. So that's good. Here's the battery voltage, right? We're on solar power. Looks good. So it's pretty cool, I think, technology. Here's air temperature during this 5-day, or I think I grabbed 100 observations. You can see a big cold front come through. And then this is kind of cool. This is the only other one of these that I'll show. we're working with Sui He in civil engineering. And Sui is really interested in snow and sublimation. And so you can't really see it too well here, but in 3 spots around the tower, we have these 2-meter 2x4s. And this is thermocouple wire coming up. And at every one of these electrical tape zones, there's something like a little thermocouple sticking out of the wood, right? And so the purpose of these are to measure the snow temperature profile as the snow accumulates at this site throughout the winter, right? Which Sway thinks is going to be really awesome for sublimation, and I tend to agree. This is that same 5 days of data that I just downloaded yesterday. And so without even looking at our snow depth sensor, I thought it was really cool. The one that's at this soil surface at 0 centimeters, you remember air temperature went down through this period, started out as being cooler than the other ones, right? Cold air pooling, that makes sense, colder near the ground usually, until the temperature started dropping. And I'm just going to infer that because the soil surface one is now warmer than the ones above it, that cold air probably came in with some snow. And so now the snow is insulating that soil surface a little bit, right? I'm just hand waving, but like this is cool stuff that we can just grab from the laptop computer. So I'm pretty proud of this install. What can you do with long-term data? I just grabbed 3 examples of kind of recent studies that I've worked on that have to do with eddy covariance data. This is one that's looking at mega drought in the Western USA. So this is kind of the region we're looking at in white. Eric Agallo was a federal scientist until recently. Grabbed data from 26 long-term eddy covariance sites in the Western USA. This is a really cool plot of SPEI showing the Western US has pretty much been in drought since 2000. And so we're using data. Eric is leading this study with 26 flux towers. Is how are those kind of ecoregions, we're kind of grouping them into different parts of the Western USA. How's the vegetation responding to this kind of 25-year mega drought that we have going on? This is another one. This is super cool. It was led by Ryan Webb at University of Wyoming. It's super cool because it was actually a class project for his grad advanced hydrology class. That's the kind of stuff you can do with flux tower data on Ameriflux, right? The data's there. Just grab it, play with it, manipulate it, do whatever you want. This is the Budico curve for anybody who's familiar. I've done several studies with this. One way to think about the Budico curve, this is the expected relationship in this Budico's line between aridity and evaporation, normalized by precipitation. And one way to think about this line is if a point is above the line, it's over-generating stream flow relative to what a model would, Budico's model would predict, right? And vice versa. If it's underneath the line, it's under-generating stream flow. And we can get at this through ET data, which flux towers collect. So here we've got 5 long-term eddy flux sites, plotting them yearly and looking at how things like energy versus water input synchrony or asynchrony influences how stream flow, water partitioning between stream flow and evaporation. And then this is one that I did a while back, just looking at, I had 2 eddy flux towers, one that was in a similar ecosystem, both in similar ecosystems, one that was killed by bark beetles, one that was not, and I subtracted the 2 and looked at them over time and said some things about disturbance and recovery impacts for water cycling in these ecosystems. This is the Niwot Ridge Forest Flux Tower, which went into these 2 studies, a place that I work at quite a bit as well. Okay, so I think I'm perfectly on time. For a little bit less than the second half of my talk. I just wanted to kind of, like, I just give you a flavor, hopefully a really good flavor of what I do. I didn't really show hardly any data or anything that I wanted to make conclusions about. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. This is the work I'll present at AGU this year. So this was a nice little 2 birds with 1 stone for me to get a head start on that. And I'm going to present the results, just kind of a little bit of a story of what you can do with eddy covariance. And you know, the thing about that word cloud is it's just what's published. So it lags quite a bit, right? It doesn't have hardly any of my Chico State stuff, which is a lot of ag and soil carbon. And it doesn't have really anything from Montana, right? So I know there wasn't a lot of ag in that word cloud, but it's something I've been working on for a few years and I continue to work on. And this is going to be some data from a rice study. And what I've got here in the title is I just showed a lot of, right? I have an 18 years in alpine tundra site, you know, like whoop-de-doo. Sometimes that's just really monitoring and we see what comes along and we investigate that. Sometimes you have a hypothesis that you're more interested in like digging into than just throwing up a tower and monitoring, right? And so I have a tower that looks just like this in my lab now. Please talk to me if you have a idea for how we might get together on looking at ET or carbon flux from an ecosystem, especially with short statured vegetation, right? Anything like 3 or 4 feet or below, we can just put up this tripod tower and away we go. And so this is an example. This is the same tower. This is, I'll say more about it in a minute, but this is a rice field. And this is when it was flooded. And there's no rice planted in this field. You'll find out in a minute. And then this is after it was flooded and kind of the weeds growing around. Somewhere I couldn't really remember where in California. So this study, the main problem is for birds anyway. Oh, I'm just noticing this. This just says in drought years. In drought years, it's become more profitable for rice growers to sell water than to sell rice. And so what this means is California, right? Like big water, I guess we could just say, but usually either has too much or not enough, and frequently has had a lot of not enough. And so rice growers have the options. This is meant to be a fallowed rice field. If they fallow their field for the year, they can sell their water essentially downstream to Southern California. And the California Department of Water Resources and the US Bureau of Rec have agreed on this sort of exchange rate where they get credit for savings of 3 acre-feet per acre of water, which is, you know, hopefully the ag people in the room can follow these units, right? An acre foot, how much it takes to cover an acre of land with a foot of water. So they get this credit of 3 acre-feet per acre of water for every acre of land that they fallow. And then they can sell that water, right? They didn't use it, so they have a credit. And they can get money for that credit that depends on where you're located in the state, what the prices are that year. But it can be up to $1,000 an acre foot, right? It can be less than that too, but it can be more lucrative than growing rice. So, however, migratory birds along the Pacific Flyway, which goes up the Pacific coast of the Western North America, have come to depend on shallowly flooded rice fields during the spring and fall for habitat. And so the Nature Conservancy is interested in this, and they funded us to look at, so here's supposed to be a schematic of now the fields are flooded, here's the birds. What would it look like if farmers left behind, or if farmers that were fallowing their fields, right, just strategically flooded the fields shallowly for bird habitat only, for 3 or 4 weeks during the migratory period in the spring or fall. And what would that do to this exchange rate, right? Because they're going to be using water. They're not going to be saving everything and just selling it. They're going to have to use water to flood. And so they contracted with us to use eddy covariance to look at basically how much water gets used and how much should be subtracted from the 3 acre-feet per acre savings if they flooded for the birds. So it's a pretty cool, I think it's a pretty cool kind of applied study. So we measured eddy covariance in 2021 down here outside of Davis, California. We're in northern Sacramento Valley, California here. In 2022, much more in the heart of rice growing country. Green is rice fields in Colusa County, California. So one growing season of eddy covariance measurements at each. Here's the cumulative ET from both of our measurement campaigns. They were both, you can see, during the fall migratory period. And in both of these cases, these are farmers who agreed to participate in a pilot program where they did what I just described. They didn't grow rice and they flooded their fields for 3 or 4 weeks during the fall migratory period. And then we measured evapotranspiration and away we go. So what I'm showing here is cumulative ET. So, and I've broken it down by field phase. So phase 1 is before flooding. Phase 2, the field is flooded. These gray bars are the phase things. And phase 3 is after flooding, but before disking for weeds, right? Those weeds that you saw can use quite a lot of water. So the farmers don't like those. And then in the second year, there was a phase 4, which is post-flooding, post-disking. And so we're trying to really capture the representative ET from each of these phases. And so I've got what we measured, and then I've also got ETO here, which is California Ag speak for potential evapotranspiration. So this is just an energy measurement, right? Given sort of unlimited water, how much water could have evaporated from those fields at that time. So when it's flooded, right, ET is closer to potential ET because there's water on the landscape. When there's no water around, you can't evaporate water out of dry soil. So those numbers are different. So cumulatively, again, I'm ag units here, about 0.6 and 0.8 acre-feet per acre of water evaporated from these fields during that time. Remember, the exchange rate is 3 acre-feet per acre, current exchange rate. So the next step, this is really trying to be as applied as we can. I'm going to go ahead and say eyeball. There's a little bit more to it, but tried to determine representative ET. This is a fraction of potential ET values from each of these phases, essentially just dividing the blue line and the gray line here, right? What was the fraction of potential ET during each of these phases? So when the field is not flooded, it's like 0. When the field is flooded, we determined something like 0.8, right? Because PET is really easy to measure, or ETO, I'm sorry, use those interchangeably. So during flooding, we kind of came up with the 0.8 value. Post-flooding, pre-disking, maybe more like 0.6. And post-flooding, post-disking, maybe something like 0.4. Okay, so kind of coming up with these representative fractional values. And then we made some assumptions, but came up with a heat map. And we've accompanied this with a reference lookup table that just requires 2 inputs, flooding date and flooding duration, to be able to determine how much water this practice would use, right? So got some labels on here. Basically, it's not rocket science. The earlier you flood and the longer you flood, remember we're in fall, so earlier is more like summer. the more evapotranspiration there's going to be. And vice versa, right? The later you go and the shorter you go, the less there's going to be. And so we also plotted on this heat map, these are our 2 years, right? So in 2021, the grower started on August 30th or something and flooded for like 28 days. And I showed you that there was something like 0.6 acre feet per acre. And in 2022, they started like a month earlier, but went a little bit shorter. And that was the 0.8. So the idea for this is like a tool that can be used to estimate, right? There's some assumptions in here about how much water associated with flooding for the birds. Last thing, I'm not a proponent of more eddy flux towers or eddy flux towers everywhere, right? Like they're costly, they take expertise to run, right? Eddy flux towers are great. They're kind of the gold standard, but my goal, and I think the goal of our community, is to try to use them more as benchmarking or calibrations for either remote sensing or cheaper or ways that, right, like every farmer can use. So one of the things that is out there is this thing called OpenET. There's also another in California. They use a lot of what's called the surface renewal method. I won't get into it too much. It was developed at Davis. It's also cheaper. So we had 3 surface renewal stations at each one of our fields, as well as freely available OpenET data, which is model data fusion, uses satellite remote sensing and runs it through 6 different models, and you can get an output of ET that were on like a 30 meter or so resolution. And so here the blue is eddy covariance, the green is OpenET, and we waved our hands and we said, oh, there's pretty good agreement between eddy covariance and OpenET in these systems, right? Maybe not so much the orange, which is the surface renewal. And so taking advantage of that, Nature Conservancy was also interested in the spring migratory period, but we didn't measure during the spring migratory, like we weren't out there. Oops. So we were able to, using OpenET and using that kind of comparison data, back calculate our analysis for 2021 and 2022, now using only OpenET data, where we compared fields that were flooded in red that we could identify based on land use data versus a selection of 100 fields during each year that were idled or fallowed. So here's, whatever we used during 2021, here's what we used during 2022. And I'm skipping over a lot of stuff, but we made a similar heat map for the spring season, right? So now we're moving forward in time into the summer. So the colors are just a little bit reversed. You get more ET if you flood later and more ET if you flood longer, and vice versa. And you can kind of take away from this map that you can actually get a little bit lower ET than you did in the fall, where the lowest was more like 0.4 acre feet per acre. Here we're at like 0.2, and the highest is more like, is similar between seasons at 0.8. So I think this is my last slide. Kind of trying to wrap this up. So the goal of this analysis is co-benefits, right, for growers and for habitat, where people can play nicely with each other. Here's those kind of values that I just highlighted, right? We determined that there was a range from about 0.2 to 0.8 acres feet per acre that would be consumed if this practice were adopted in California, and that it depends on these 2 factors, flooding date and duration. If you subtract those from 3, you just get these numbers. And then the ball is going to be in the Nature Conservancy's court to, they're really interested in drumming up, through a combination of public and private investment, money to fill this gap. And so we hope that they're able to do that, but basically to incentivize people to enroll in these leave behind programs to benefit the migratory shorebirds. State of California will still pay you for this much money and then Nature Conservancy's program will come in and fill that gap in with the rest. So our next step is to get this published, and then we've been working with California Department of Water Resources throughout the process, but really what we're really interested in is to get this 3 acre-feet per acre, which is state accepted practice, right? Money is allocated based on this number to be updated to reflect folks that want to participate in these leave behind programs, and that they could actually kind of not really write into the legislature, but make these official and start this practice. All right, that was a lot. Thanks very much.